Welcome to Justice Unveiled, where we explore real stories of courage, bias, and the fight for fairness in a world where justice isn't always served equally. Today, we bring you the story of Sarah Collins, a federal prosecutor who walked into a small-town courtroom expecting nothing more than a fair hearing. What she encountered, though, was arrogance, bias, and a system that underestimated her. This isn't just a story about one woman's courage. It's a story about what happens when you challenge power in a system designed to silence you. Sarah's response left an entire courtroom speechless and set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. Sarah Collins was no stranger to courtrooms. For over a decade, she had worked as a federal prosecutor, handling some of the toughest cases in the state. Fraud, corruption, trafficking. She had seen it all. She knew the law inside and out, and she understood the weight of every decision made in court. But on this day, she wasn't there as a prosecutor. She wasn't there for a high-profile case or a complex legal battle. Sarah was there as a defendant. The case was seemingly minor. A property fine was issued over what the city claimed was an improperly maintained lot. Sarah believed the fine was unfair and filed a formal challenge. The hearing should have been routine. She expected to present her evidence, clarify the situation, and move on. But from the moment she stepped into that small-town courthouse, she realized that this case would be anything but routine. The courtroom was small and dimly lit, with rows of wooden benches worn smooth from decades of use. Defendants and attorneys sat quietly, waiting for their names to be called. At the center of it all was Judge Harold Barrett, a man whose reputation for harshness and arrogance preceded him. He was known for his sharp tongue and for ruling with an iron fist. Some said he had no patience for those he saw as wasting his time. Others whispered about a more troubling side to his record, a pattern of dismissiveness toward women and minorities. Sarah sat quietly, her case files neatly arranged in her lap. When her name was called, she stood, adjusted her blazer, and approached the podium with confidence. She was ready to present her case. But what she encountered was a wall of dismissiveness and bias she hadn't anticipated. Sarah began by calmly outlining her argument. She referenced specific statutes, explained the circumstances, and presented her evidence. But before she could finish, Judge Barrett interrupted her mid-sentence. His tone was sharp and condescending, as though he had already made up his mind. "Ms. Collins, do you even understand the statute you're referring to?" he said. "Let me educate you." The comment hung in the air, drawing quiet murmurs from the gallery. Sarah paused for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She wasn't here to be intimidated. She was here for justice, and she wasn't going to let anyone dismiss her without a fair hearing. "With all due respect, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice steady, "I not only understand the statute, I've prosecuted cases using it." Her words landed like a quiet thunderclap. A few heads turned in the gallery, and even the court clerk seemed to pause. But Judge Barrett barely acknowledged her response. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, flipping through her documents with visible disinterest. "I don't see how any of this is relevant," he said. "Let's move on." Sarah could feel her frustration growing, but she kept her composure. She had dealt with difficult judges before, but this was different. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding of the law. This was about power. The judge wasn't interested in her argument because he didn't think she deserved to be heard. It wasn't just arrogance. It was bias, plain and simple. The confrontation reached its peak when the judge, clearly irritated, leaned forward and said, "And who are you to lecture me about justice?" Sarah could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air. The room had gone completely silent, and all eyes were on her. She took another deep breath, her hands resting lightly on the podium, and then she spoke. "Your Honor," she said, "I have served as lead counsel on over 50 criminal cases, many involving complex legal interpretations. I know the law, and I know this court's duty to uphold it fairly." The reaction was immediate. A murmur rippled through the gallery, and several people leaned forward in their seats, whispering to one another. Judge Barrett's expression froze for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he processed her words. He hadn't expected this. To him, Sarah had been just another defendant, someone he could dismiss with a few cutting remarks. But now the dynamics in the room had shifted. The judge cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. "Credentials aside, this court operates on facts, not on personal opinions," he said. "Let's proceed." But Sarah wasn't finished. She knew this wasn't just about her case anymore. This was about standing up for everyone who had ever been silenced or dismissed in that courtroom. She met the judge's gaze and said, "Your Honor, every case deserves a proper review, regardless of who stands at this podium. That's what justice requires, and that's all I'm asking for." As the hearing continued, the tension in the courtroom remained thick. Even as the judge tried to regain control, it was clear that something had shifted. People in the gallery were paying closer attention now, nodding in quiet agreement as Sarah made her points. By the time the session ended, Sarah had done more than just defend her case. She had made a statement. After the hearing, people began to approach her. Defendants, attorneys, even a court clerk, all of them had something to say. One woman, her voice trembling, said, "I've been coming here for months. I've never seen anyone speak up like that. Thank you." But Sarah's fight wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, she began to dig deeper into Judge Barrett's record. What she found was troubling. Patterns of bias were evident in his rulings, particularly against women and people of color. Complaints about his behavior had been filed over the years, but they had quietly disappeared without investigation. Sarah knew she couldn't let this go. She compiled her findings and took them to the local bar association, presenting her evidence with the same calm precision she had shown in court. What started as one woman's fight for fairness quickly grew into something much larger, a movement to hold the system accountable. But just as Sarah began to gain traction in her efforts, she received an unexpected phone call. The voice on the other end was quiet, almost hesitant, as though the caller was afraid of being overheard. "Ms. Collins," the voice said, "you need to know something. There's more to Judge Barrett than what you've seen. Much more." Before she could respond, the line went dead. What Sarah didn't know was that this call would lead her to uncover truths far darker than she had imagined. But that's a story for another day. Thank you for joining us on Justice Unveiled. Sarah's story is a powerful reminder that standing up for fairness isn't just about winning a single battle. It's about sparking change in a system that often resists it. But here's the question. What would you do if you were in Sarah's position? And do you want to know what Sarah uncovered about Judge Barrett and the hidden, darker truths about the system she was fighting against? Let us know if you'd like to hear the rest of her story. Your feedback will shape what we explore next. Stay tuned for more stories of courage, bias, and the fight for fairness. Together, we can uncover the truths that matter most.